Here we are again, Zanita. We are together this week.
Crazy.
It's great to have you in the office. For those that don't know, usually Zanita is working remotely, and so we are always online. But today we get to be in the same room, which
fancy
is
studio.
in a fancy studio. You'll recognize this studio from our part 1 of our conversation last week. This is the same spot I interviewed Kyle in, and we thought it might be fun to host this conversation from there. So we're going to play that in just a moment. But first, why are we talking about this movie?
Well, for starters, we featured it in our latest issue. This is the August issue. You can get your hands on that. It features a few articles as well as the interview you did with the director. But yeah, this is basically a movie about Adventist history that is screening in cinemas in Australia and New Zealand in October.
It's pretty cool. Epic that it's a movie about Adventists. It's a movie about our origins and our heritage, but it's going to be in mainstream cinemas.
Yeah.
Now, it's not like a wide it can be a wide release. It can be as many cinemas as the demand is there for people to go and see it. So that's exciting. This magazine is going to be floating around in August. It should already have reached your churches or your conferences at least. And we think, both Zanita and I work on signs, we think it's a great opportunity to hand it to someone you have a relationship with. They can read about the movie, get a taste, get a sense of what the movie's about, hear from the director of the movie. And then it's your opportunity to follow up what they thought and maybe invite them to see that movie with you if you're planning to see it. It's a great way to maybe ease them into the concept of going to see this movie with you. So that's
You're like me. I like reading reviews and things before the movie to see if it's actually worth paying the money. But
that's right. And so that is an opportunity. This Signs magazine will be floating around, and we printed a bunch of extra copies, and many people have pre-ordered them. So if you can get the Signs magazine, hand it to a friend. I think that's the best way to invite them to the movie, because then they'll be somewhat familiar. They'll have read the review, and it won't be completely like,
it's not like you're tricking them,
flabbergasting walking in. They know what it's about, and you can have that personal conversation with them. So today we are going to play the rest of that interview with Kyle. Now, Zanita, you've seen some of those clips as well. It's a whoops.
Yeah, Kyle's a fun guy. He's got some awesome things to say about not just about the movie, but about storytelling, about faith. About whether we should buy popcorn from the cinemas or smuggle it in.
My particular favorite part of this conversation was getting into the characters of Adventist history, like the individuals who are represented on screen and what they might have been like, what we can learn from them. So we'll get that up running for you guys. We hope you enjoy the second part of our conversation with Kyle Portbury. As always, if you have any comments, any questions, chuck them in the chat, put them in the comments, and we will be here to answer. We will respond. So without further ado, here is Kyle Portbury, director of The Hopeful. As a theme, hope.
Yes.
Right? Why do we need hope in the world today? It's a loaded. I could answer the question from like looking around the world. People are struggling. But from your perspective, this theme of hope, why is it so important to tell this story now?
I think the people, I'm going to look down the camera for this, because the person on the other side watching this conversation doesn't need me to tell them that, right? They're smart enough to work that out. And I think that's the value of storytelling for cinema, is that you're acknowledging that audience, you guys, are really intelligent. So you're going to go and you're going to have an experience with The Hopeful, and you already know why the world needs hope. You don't need me to sit here and pontificate about it. Like, it's very clear to us, and I think what engaging with stories that provoke and prompt you to think about who you are in the world and why our particular as Adventists worldview is very hopeful and healing in that hope, and the role that you play when you walk out of the cinema re-inspired, that taking that hope and healing out into your little area of the community might actually be a really good thing for the community. I would encourage people, put the onus on yourself. Like
Yes.
you are smart and intelligent.
Well, what does hope mean to you then? If I reframe that slightly.
Yeah.
Because hope, I guess any word that we use has
Yes.
different definitions to
Yeah.
different people. But what does hope mean to you? And,
Yep.
and what have you learned about hope in the process of telling this story?
I think if you are genuine about wanting to have a relationship with another person, right? Like you're actually not, you've moved from it being transactional, you know, like I'm going out and I'm having this conversation or this relationship so I can get this thing back and I can go and tell somebody, well, look at the numbers,
Right.
you know, whether it be box office or whatever it be, or even baptisms, dare I say, right?
Yeah.
If you move it from transactional and you move it back into relational, and the most important thing about that is that the person that I'm in relationship understands that I care about them and understands that if they say, hey, Kyle, I need to tell you this in confidence, or I need a hand with this thing, right? Or can I rely on you for X, Y, Z, you know? That's not going to come with the yes, you can, but first of all, read this handbill and come to church with me.
Right.
You know, I think that's where, to me, hope lies. It's in that the relationship is more important than the transaction. You know, and when you see the response that people give when you genuinely are interested in them and their life over what you're going to get out of that relationship, there, I think, lies the hope and healing. You know, so hope to me is relationship first. You know, get to know people, become part of their life. That's the most important thing that you can do, because if you're part of their life, then you're simply being there is going to bring a hope that didn't currently exist. Unless you're a very negative person and not very nice to be around, in which case you're probably not going to do that. But you're not that person. You're a very kind,
thank you, Kyle.
caring person.
I
I meant
appreciate
that in just general politics.
Oh,
about
okay,
the person
okay.
out there. Yeah.
America is a very Christian nation.
Yes.
In some ways. It's slated that way. People are a bit more comfortable or a bit more familiar with that Christian identity. Australia and New Zealand, not so much. We're sort of very post-Christian, secular societies.
Yep.
How do you think that will impact the way the movie's received here?
Well, I think that depends on how you perceive storytelling, right? Like if you're going to the hopeful expecting to be dictated to, then the impact's going to be negative, right?
Right.
And my encouragement to people is go and see it and see for yourself what it is first. You know, like go out and engage with it. Don't end game what you think it is, right? Like somebody said to me the other day, well, isn't this just Tell the World repackaged? No, actually it's not. You know, it's a very, very different story. And it's all well and good for me to say that, right? But you're not going to know that unless you go and watch it, you know? So if you think you know what you're going into, my encouragement to you is, well, go and watch it and prove that. And if it isn't what you think it's going to be, well, that's going to be great too, isn't it? Right? Like, and also the other encouragement would be, even if you saw Tell the World, the whole purpose of The Hopeful is to create a cinema experience that it gives you the opportunity to engage with the community who never saw that in the first place anyway. Right? That's just not something that they ever engaged with. It was never designed for cinema. That was not its purpose. And so now having this unique opportunity of a cinematic experience, which by the way is going to be mainstream released in Australia and New Zealand, it's going to be on screens for at least a week, right?
Yeah.
Multiple sessions a day in multiple cinemas all around both countries. So, I mean, it's not, you know, it's going to be a very different experience, and there's going to be a lot of visibility in both Australia and New Zealand. You know, what a golden opportunity to, again, go back to the beginning of this conversation where I was talking about being asked about aspects of my faith that shocked me because I've never been asked about my faith ever before. You know, like that's going to be interesting for people, suddenly realizing that there is an interest in some of these things that we thought people would have no interest in. You know, I think getting that mindset shift and that change of, oh, wow, okay, so this thing that I do that I always thought was weird and quirky is actually appealing to somebody else who's never heard of it. Oh, okay. especially if you're a lifelong Adventist, right? Like this is an easier equation I found talking to people that discovered Adventism later in life or
Right.
became Christian later in life,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Like it's easier to see how that transition happens. For someone like me who's been a lifelong Adventist, well, you never arrived at a come to Jesus moment, right? You were born into it. And so suddenly being confronted with, oh, like this is actually appealing to people outside of like my immediate family traditional upbringing. Okay, interesting. And in these areas that I never thought would be interesting at all. You know?
So if I am an Adventist, which I am,
Which you
surprise, what do I do with the film? How do I engage with it? What's the best way to engage with this film?
Well, I would say go and buy a ticket when it goes on sale, like you would, you go to the cinema and watch Oppenheimer. So go and buy a ticket like you normally would there. And then after you watch it, who are the 3, 4, 5 people from your sphere of influence who you think would benefit from coming back and going to see the movie with you, and then take them out to eat afterwards? It's also one of the very few films that are going to be on general cinema release this year in Australia and New Zealand that's actually truly a family movie. We had I would walk into cinemas in America and there would be everyone from the age of 5 to 95 plus in there together, and they all had a fabulous experience, but totally different.
Right.
So when you would talk to the 5, 6, 7-year-old kid, or the 13-year-old, or the 18-year-old, or the 85-year-old, or the 40-year-old, everyone's experience was slightly different. The things that they talked about were different, but they had all enjoyed it collectively.
Right.
And that's quite a unique thing in cinema today. Like there's very few, like I couldn't take my 11-year-old son to Oppenheimer.
Right.
So I can only enjoy that film by myself, essentially. I can't take my kids to that. Whereas I can take my kids to The Hopeful, and they're getting something completely different, actually, to what I do out of it.
Yes.
My kids hadn't seen it for a year, and they went to the premiere in Los Angeles a couple of weeks back. And it was interesting because my daughter was like, I don't remember like enjoying it quite this much, Daddy. And I'm like, well, that's very like candid of you.
Yep.
Because that means that the first time she watched it a year ago, she remembers not enjoying it as much as she enjoyed it a year later. And so you kind of go, oh wow, like that's not her pandying to like, oh, this is my dad's film and he made it. This is her actually discerning for herself. And when I asked her what it was, she said, oh, I really liked Lucy Miller, and I liked the way that she encouraged him. I liked the way that she spoke to him. And I also liked Ellen because of the way that she persevered. And so you're like, wow, I never anticipated that my 9-year-old would engage with a film that was never designed for her in the first place. Go figure.
So take the family, take your friends,
Absolutely.
make a whole day of it, make an event.
Yeah, and don't, like travel together.
Yep.
Because again, it's about relationship, right? It's about getting in community. It's an opportunity. So it's going to be weird for the guy that made the film to say this isn't actually an opportunity to see a movie. It's an opportunity to hang out with people, right? That's the opportunity. And I think that's the more important thing than the film. The film is just the excuse. The actual opportunity and the value to you is the experience that you're going to have with the people that you take. So don't just go by yourself. That would be my encouragement. Yeah.
Which character would you say you identified with, and who was the hardest to portray in the movie? Because as you've said, some of these people have been built up in a sense, as often happens in religious traditions. People become almost canonized.
Yes.
So which one did you find yourself relating to, and which one was hard to actually portray for whatever reason?
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating that those two are both women for a start, right? So I relate more to Ellen's sister Elizabeth, just in attitude, right? Like I see in her a cynicism and a natural sense of skeptical that I hold, right? And so I look at her response to these events and I go, it's probably a good thing that I wasn't in existence in this period of time, because if I'd gone through that experience, I think I'd be her, where I'd be like, yeah, this is bogus. you know? And I think it's healthy to recognize that. Like, it's easy to go, oh, yes, I would be the person that stuck with it, persevered to the end, and, praise Jesus. I wouldn't be.
Right,
you know?
right.
And I like the fact that I can be honest with myself about that. And I think the flip side of that, Ellen, hugely hard character to do justice to as an actual human being, because she's been mythologized to the point now where she's almost irrelevant, you know? So it was trying to work out how to give her an actual life back again based on hard fact and reality. So like a lot of the work I did originally, it was great because it's all sitting there in rushes to work with. But I had to reacquaint myself even in the edit. At nighttime, I would go home and I'd reread correspondence just to double check. And I looked at the correspondence between her and her husband, or her and Bates, or her and whoever it was, right? These guys wrote lots of letters, and they're all available to look at freely online, which is great. So you can work out who someone is by the way that they speak to other people. And so I would constantly double check that and go, oh, okay, so yeah, it is legitimate to say that this person in this situation would respond like this. Okay, so as I'm sitting down in the edit suite and I'm looking at crafting that particular performance in that scene or that moment or that sequence, okay, I've got a really solid basis to go, I'm going to craft it in this direction because that's what I think is the closest to the person that I'm seeing in the written correspondence.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
And so you're always trying to give them life, you know? And for me, an audience member sitting there, you know, she's hard to give life to because we've almost sucked the life out of her.
Right.
We have put on her either she can do no wrong or all she does is wrong.
Right.
You know, so there's these two polar camps now when it comes to Ellen White in Adventism. What's fascinating when you talk to people who've never heard of her before and encounter her for the first time in the Hopeful, they're like, wow, there was a woman in the 1800s with agency who got listened to by men and her legacy is this?
Yes.
This woman's amazing.
Right.
You know,
Wow.
and so to see that response to it, you're like, man, we have really done this person a disservice historically as Adventists because we have either made her so like heavenly minded that she's no earthly good, or we've just gone, everything that she said and did was rubbish.
Yep.
So let's just chuck it out and don't look at it at all. I think the answer to relating to her and her role in modern day Adventism is somewhere in the middle of that, right? Like, and choose your own adventure with her, right? Like, where is she useful to you? You know, like she said herself many times, and I love that she did this, that she went, I am not the last word and testament on anything. You know, I'm just giving you a lesser light, which is a term she used often. I'm just giving you an insight, essentially, is what she's saying. Take it or leave it, you know. But don't make the mistake, and I think people in 2024 make the mistake of reading something that she said to someone in the 1800s as gospel truth, right? Without looking at the context of the fact that she went specifically to that person, right?
Right.
And it was a message for that person.
Yes.
So whatever you believe about her inspiration and what she said, don't read into her saying something to someone specifically as a word for you. Like if you can get something interesting out of that, great, good for you. Like if that provokes thought and it challenges you, but that is not a mandate on your life. That was a mandate on that person's life if they chose to buy into it, you know? And so I think it's looking at her in the context for which she established for herself, you know, first and foremost. And then the value is in the person and the fruits of that person's life. And again, I come back to the fact that what she gravitated to was a very clear hope and healing character of Christ. When you look at her legacy down the line, say what you will about her, but there are a lot of good hospitals that do a lot of good in the world, and there is a massive humanitarian agency that does a lot of good out in the world. Now, if that's not hope and healing and a legacy to go, okay, well, there might be some value to her, right? Then, you know, I'm open to being wrong about that.
Why would a non-Christian person want to go see this film? It's about a Christian church, the start of some obscure to some people denomination that they haven't heard of before.
Yeah.
Why would they want to spend money? It's expensive in Australia to go see
It's expensive
a film.
everywhere to go and watch a movie.
Why would they do that?
Because it's good characters and a good story, right? You don't have to be Adventist to enjoy a good story about good characters, right? All biopics function on, well, here's people and something they did that there's recognizable and relatable things in their character and the way that they respond to the world. And that's interesting, right? Like, it's interesting seeing how somebody else dealt with a big life change. You know, that's why we go to the cinema. We want to see how other people dealt with things. And then we want to experience the emotional roller coaster that they went on in the safety of a cinema seat with popcorn.
Living vicariously through those characters.
You know, so whilst you don't have to be like looking forward to the soon return of Christ, you can be looking forward to the new car that you're potentially going to buy with the windfall that you're going to get from XYZ, right? And when that doesn't happen, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I recognize like that ugly crying in the field, right? Like, because that's what I did when that thing didn't pan out the way I thought that it. Oh, look at how they dealt with that. So I think it's in seeing how other people deal with the big issues and the big life experiences. The context is almost irrelevant, right? So for someone who doesn't have anything to do with Christianity or Adventism, you know, it's no different to going and watching Oppenheimer, for instance. You're just getting an insight into someone's life that you didn't know about, you know. And I think that's the interest. And people love period drama.
Yep.
You know, a good costume drama with a great, and honestly, like the music in this, Blake Robinson, who did the score, and Jonas Myron. So if you've ever listened to 10,000 Reasons or Cornerstone, he wrote both of those with Matt Redman. More recently, he's been working a lot with Andrea Bocelli.
Wow.
So a lot of Andrea Bocelli's most recent single releases have been written by Jonas. He just wrote an album for Matteo, Andrea's son. He's been working with Lauren Daigle and Barbara Streisand and Celine Dion. So just, and those songs are out now, actually. You can go, if you go to Spotify and just type in the Hopeful Movie soundtrack, it's already out. It got released with the US release back in April. And Made For You, one of the two title tracks songs, is already out as well. So you can listen to both those. They're amazing. You know, absolutely world-class storytelling in their own, right, on their own. So you'll get a real sense of time and place from Made For You, for instance. Like you'll listen to that and you'll go, oh wow, this is speaking to me in a way just as a song. Like it's an incredible journey and experience in the 3.5 minutes of the song. So go and check that out. It's on all the places you would find music now.
Great.
Yeah.
I forgot my question. I was thinking, after this, I should go listen to that song.
After this, I should go listen to that, yeah.
That was definitely something I'm going to do.
It's great. It goes on repeat in our car just because it's on one of our playlists set up. And so it'll come on. And
the kids love it.
Oh, kids love it.
Yep.
You know? And they had engaged with, I guess the value of your father being a filmmaker is that you get to meet random people all the time. So, you know, when we were doing post-production in Sydney in 2022, they came down and they got to see things in the middle of creation.
Right. That process
of the process. So they got to engage with Jonas and got to know him. And so they'd already listened to a lot of his back catalogue. So it was interesting. So they'd already been listening to a lot of his songs. So they're just tracking now. He's like part of their playlist promotion.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
I remember my question.
Yes.
As a director, how has this changed you? Making this movie, the story, the characters, and your outlook on life going forward.
Yeah.
How is this process?
Well, I think it's fun creatively when you look at something you made 10 years ago for me now, right?
Yeah.
Like, so coming at that with fresh eyes was actually a lot of fun because you realize you're like, oh, well, we got really great performances in the camera. And 10 years down the track, you're more mature creatively. You've just had a lot more creative experiences in your life. but also just the way, like you're 10 years older. So your life experience and the way that you look at the world is different. So I looked then at those characters and those story beats and the way that that story could play out with a very different eye to how I would have 10 years ago. So it was a lot of fun because like this film could not have been made any time before we walked into the Post house down in Sydney in August of 2020. So 2 years ago, almost. I didn't have the maturity to tell it this way back then. I also didn't have the industry connections, right? Like, so because you've done more stuff,
right.
You've now all of a sudden, Jonas and I only met on a previous, I was working in South Africa on Angel Studios' David movie that's coming out next year.
Oh, great, yeah.
As one of the lead writers on that. So if you've seen there's 5 prequel shorts, young
Seen
David.
some of the shorts, yeah, the kids.
So I wrote those with Brent, the director, as well,
yeah.
Back a year and a bit ago.
Yep.
So Jonas and I met on that film.
Yep.
And so it's great because you realize that, okay, this other creative collaborator has a very similar way of looking at, rhythm and timing and how music functions in a story narrative. And so we got to play around with ways that music and dialogue and visual interact that I never would have ever even tried 10 years ago because I would have been too afraid to. Again, it comes back to this failure thing. Like I've got really comfortable now with stuff not working out.
Right.
So it allowed me in this process to just try stuff. And a lot of times it works.
Yep.
And stuff that doesn't, you just go, oh, well,
try something else.
Try something else. So, and I think when, maturity also allows you to be like, well, this person and their skills aren't a threat. When you're younger, like almost you view the world as like, well, if this person looks better than I do, then what's that going to say about me, right?
Okay.
Like, you get down the road a little bit and you're kind of like, actually, I'm pretty lucky to be getting to work with these incredible people and they make many more films a year than I do. So I'm kind of silly if I don't. Let's look at the options that they've got and how they're looking at this story and the prompts that they give. And then you go, okay, maybe that piece and maybe this bit. Oh, and I really like that offer. That's a great offer. Let's try that in the mix. And then all of a sudden something changes and you go down a completely different path than any of you would have gone down before.
Yep.
And you've got this beautiful film at the end of it that's not like anything you imagined that it could have been, And I think that's been the learning for me is you have to be fearless to tell stories without, just let the story tell itself through you. Don't try and force it into a corner because you're too afraid to let it tell you where it needs to go. I think that was the discovery for me is that it's, the more you kind of let it breathe, I don't even mean in time, just like kind of let that process guide you as to how that story should be told. Where is it resonating with people? The majority, there was only 2 Adventists that ever worked on the post-production of this.
Yes.
And so it's nice because you're getting constant feedback from people who are just looking at films in general.
Yes.
Like massive movies, like a colorist did Elvis before he did The Hopeful. So, yes. And straight after that, he was working on like George Miller movies, Most of our post team did Furiosa. Like 2 weeks after our final mix, they rolled onto the pre-mix of Furiosa. So you kind of, they're looking at things critically from a storytelling point of view. And when they're saying, this is a really good movie, Kyle. Like we're really enjoying this. This is kind of like what our expectation is of cinema. You're like, okay.
Great. Yeah.
You realize it's an Adventist story, right? That's fun because you're like, you're able to go, okay, well, our stories are on par, right? Like they're as engaging to a general audience as anybody else's story. So why not tell them,
I don't know if you can tell us, but what's next? Like, are you working on any other projects?
Several.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
Not many, but there is one that's focused, I think, on just the way that forgiveness operates.
Okay.
And it's very, so it's I guess the easiest way to articulate it is that it's a reverse revenge film. So you're
Okay.
gonna see all the same beats leading up to, like, it's almost like what would happen if John Wick wrestled with retribution and in the end forgiveness was the answer instead of let's kill everybody and their dog.
Right.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's looking at that, at forgiveness through that lens, which again is very recognizable. Like we all have those moments where we feel like justice needs to be served. And I guess forgiveness, if you really look hard at it, kind of says to us that justice being served is freeing yourself of the burden of needing justice to be served in a way. So it's fascinating. And this is like a true story again.
Yep.
Incredible one. I can't say too much about it and give too much away, but yeah, it's currently being packaged and hopefully we'll be filming next year.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Hey, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, Jared.
Yeah, it's been lovely to hear a bit of the background behind the story. Is there anything else you'd like to share to wrap up this conversation?
No, just buy lots of popcorn because, there's no better way to enjoy a movie really than popcorn. Probably stay away from the Coke because all that high fructose corn syrup is...
caffeine does...
And they make fabulous coffees in gold class. Just saying. And they'll bring it out to you in the third sitting. So, yeah.
Very good. I think we're good.
Yeah.
We will... I was going to ask you some silly questions.
Yes.
Just for some social media fun.
Brevity.
Here we are. That ends the conversation with Kyle Portbury, director of The Hopefuls. Anita,
What about the silly questions?
you'll have to stay tuned to our social media. We're going to put up some other little snippets that we've done with Kyle in Record Land and in Signs Land. So some of our social channels there. So if you're following us, you'll get to see some of those at some point in the lead up to the release of the movie, which is the 17th of October. I believe it comes out into public release. There's going to be some pre-screenings for Adventist members that they can go along to, I think, the weekend sort of before that. So keep an eye out for more information in that space. But Zanita, we like to get practical here on Record Live. Is there anything, what can we take practically away from the conversation with Kyle that we've had over the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think one thing that I found really helpful and really interesting that he said was just when he was talking about, you asked him about how can people be more comfortable sharing their faith, and he kind of boiled it down to just being more relational, like find things that you can talk to people about, focus on that relational aspect because that's where the fruit is kind of going to show. So don't stress so much about like trying to say the right things and have those spiritual conversations, but just kind of lead by example. Yeah, so I
think that's the thing with the signs that we shared earlier and with the movie itself. It's an opportunity to be relational and share your faith in a relational way. I think Kyle really emphasized it. Might have been in the first part. Take someone, like make sure you're watching this movie in relationship with others. Yeah. So that's sort of a cool point that we can take away. Well, thanks again for joining us on Record Live. We hope you have a great week and God bless.